Welcome back to Journey to Healing. We are looking at probably the second most important gift that God has given us. The first being the gift of salvation, the gift of His Son. Do you know what the second one is? It's really the key to emotional stability, especially when you are going through very difficult things. And if you've been with us for any length of time, you would know that the most difficult of all things is when people have decided to target you. When the enemy comes in like a flood, what do? Well, God has given us something for our stability, and we will look at that next on this edition of Journey to Healing.
Welcome to Journey to Healing. Do you find yourself discouraged, troubled, in need of healing, but not sure where to turn? Jon Uhler, a licensed professional counselor, is here to help. Jon has more than 30 years of professional experience, helping people deal with the issues that keep them emotionally and spiritually stuck. There is help. There really is hope. There is a God who loves you, who wants to help you find peace and strength. And Jon Uhler is here to help you find that on this edition of Journey to Healing.
Welcome back, everyone. My name is Jon Uhler. This is Journey to Healing. We're here every Friday night from 8 to 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time in the U.S. on TECN.TV, the leader in Internet TV. We are in our continuation, our extended series on the topic of forgiveness, what it is versus what it is not. That comes under the umbrella of the issue of boundaries. And we've been looking at that because it's such an important and intensive topic. We've been looking at that for a couple of years. If you are in counseling, that ultimately should be one of, if not the primary topic that you discuss. There's two issues that should be discussed at some point in time in counseling because it all comes to bear in the here and now, and that has to do with, is the past resolved in your life? Is it truly resolved? So that has to do with grief and loss. If you have experienced loss, you will go through a process. My screen just lit up. You go through a process, and that is called grief. If you haven't been able to adequately or properly resolve issues, then they will stay buried and you'll drag them into the present like a ball and chain. And that will affect how you deal with people in the here and now, and that ultimately will affect how you deal with boundaries. Whether you set them, whether you respect other people's boundaries, or whether you allow others to cross your boundaries. So the goal is to be fully emotionally present in the moment when we are interacting with other people, especially when it has to do with respect and trust and value and esteem. Jesus placed the ultimate value on that. God placed the ultimate value, them being one and the same. The Sermon on the Mount, we looked at that because somebody in the midst of our series had submitted a question. Well, if you don't have to forgive others that haven't admitted or confessed or apologized, and that is really the premise of this. So the question is, what is forgiveness? Forgiveness, what is it versus what it is not? So we've been looking at now for a number of months that issue. What is forgiveness? And somebody asked, what about when Jesus said, love your enemies? Because the premise is that I'm putting forward is, I believe, the correct one, the biblical one, which is, if there's no confession, then there's no forgiveness. We looked at 1 John 1:9 for that. We pattern ourselves after God. God forgives when there's confession. Does He forgive when there is no confession? No. What sends somebody to hell? A lack of confession. So if somebody fails to confess, that is on them. Now, it doesn't mean we sit back and we take delight in the fact that we don't have to forgive, because again, that's confusing two concepts. That presupposes, and it usually has to do with the minor stuff. And if we're dealing with the minor stuff, and we looked at that in the past, the answer to if you're holding on to minor stuff is you need to get over it, right? As a matter of fact, let me bring that up. So we're not talking about minor stuff. We're talking about the 7s, 8s, 9s, and 10s. things that will change the course of your life significantly and forever. Okay, so we're not talking about minor stuff. Usually, as we made the case a number of months ago, if you major on minors and minor on majors, you're probably doing major stuff and you're cutting yourself slack. Okay, if you are susceptible to being guilt tripped, then you probably have one of those people in your life. We've talked about pigs and dogs in the past. That falls into the category of the mocker. We are not to be around pigs and dogs. We already saw that. That's Matthew chapter 7, verse 6. Jesus said, don't take what is special gift to dogs. Don't cast your pearls before swine. Why? Because you will end up having people in your life that will dump their knapsacks on you. And if you get a knapsack dumped on you, you're going to feel stress. Why? Because you're accepting somebody's emotional irresponsibility. And if you don't know it, then the body keeps the score. So a part of you will know it. And look at the abdominal aspects of these pictures, by the way, aside from love and happiness, and both of those are transient, right? So your entire body system will be impacted by it. And for the majority of those states, um, food isn't moving properly, so you're full of stuff. Okay, and that's different than a burden. So we looked at the difference between a boulder in the past. We have boulders and knapsacks, and it is crucial that we understand the difference. We're called to bear one another's burdens. That's a big boulder that has to do with life. But this is very different. We're talking about the transferring of responsibility that never should be transferred to do what is right, just, and fair. And then we looked at, again, here's a picture of what the Jews understood moving from left to right. If somebody, the little guy down there in the bottom left, if he becomes selfish, he hops the fence of conscience, therefore he trespasses against someone. If he doesn't stop and get back on the left side of that fence, back on the straight and narrow, he's going to become progressively selfish, and he's going to move from left to right. And eventually what happens, he will move into the target zone. Why is there a target zone? Because God cares deeply about us, and that's why we can be humble, or I'm sorry, meek, right? Meekness is power under control, because we trust that God will take care of it. Because if we take matters in our own hands, we might go to jail. But what a gift. The last words of Moses, the last words of God through Moses to the Israelites, Deuteronomy 32. We've looked at that in the past. As a matter of fact, I recommend go to SurvivorSupport.net under the podcast tab, and you will see all the past programs. There will be more added to this topic, this subject that we're covering, the issue of forgiveness, what it is versus what it is not. It is crucial to understand this. Why? Because I can lay upon someone false guilt that they'll never be able to get out from under, and therefore I am keeping them enslaved. I'm keeping them in chains. I'm keeping them in prison. God came to set the prisoners free. Jesus did. God sets prisoners free. Now, there are times that I can be in prison, so to speak, emotionally, and part of that is my own doing, or part of that can come from my own doing, and we've looked at that before. If I get off the straight and narrow, as a matter of fact, let's bring that up. Right? If I get off the path, if I get off the straight and narrow, then I'm doing one of two things. Either I am offloading my responsibility, so I become the little person on the right, or I accept somebody else's responsibility, which I should not, and therefore I become the selfish person is the person on the right. The fear-based person is the person on the left. Sorry, got to get my little guys. Okay, so the goal is one knapsack, no more and no less, because if we accept more than one knapsack over time, we're not this. When Jesus said, come to me, all you who are weary and heavy laden, I'll give you rest, he's not talking about this scenario, because this scenario should be avoided. This scenario is simply going to bring pain. So when I feel weary and heavy laden, that's different than this kind of stress. Okay, we're not to be around pigs and dogs. So once we get that settled, once we have proper boundaries, now we're in a position to begin to experience what Jesus talked about in the preamble to the Sermon on the Mount, his first public discourse. We spent time looking at that. It is my opinion, I'm persuaded that when it says Jesus looked out over the multitudes, and then he gives 13 verses worth of instructions to these groups of people. Oh, sorry, there's my first. Let me go back to the other. There we are. There. Okay, let me get the right picture. Sorry. Okay, so the Beatitudes, because blessed are the peacemakers. A lot of people will say that to people that have been harmed by oppressors. They will give a message that somebody who's truly spiritual won't make waves. Okay, that is not true. Okay, we've looked at that extensively. What did each of those um, characteristics mean? And so it is my contention where it says that Jesus looked out over the multitudes. Before he began his sermon, he wanted to deliver a message, and that came from Isaiah 61, where he talks about that those that have been oppressed. And so I colored those in red, and then God expects us to be protective of those that are being oppressed. So the best way, in my estimation, the only way really to understand the Sermon on the Mount is to understand that he was giving encouragement to both those that were impressed, I'm sorry, those that were oppressed and those that were stepping up to be protective. So I do not believe, though I believed it for years, I do not believe that the Beatitudes are a stair-step like fashion of spiritual growth to enter the kingdom. It is that doesn't make sense because, by the way, Jesus said, "Blessed are the poor in spirit; yours is the kingdom of God, and those that are persecuted, yours is the kingdom of God." The orange ones right there also are replicated in the book of Matthew, so it's a condensed version. The best way to understand the Sermon on the Mount, again, is that in the beginning of it, Jesus has a message to two groups of people. Those are the two groups of people that have God's heart. That is extremely important when it comes to issues of stability, because the rest of humanity really isn't going to need it. I'll tell you when you need help being stable. It is when you are being targeted by an oppressor. And again, we've looked at the difference between persecution and oppression. In the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus was talking about persecutors. Okay, we are now shifting our focus to that upper category. That is different. That is different. Paul said he was eligible for forgiveness because he persecuted and he did so out of ignorance. Now, we can use the term persecution interchangeably. David sometimes does in the book of Psalms, but a persecutor does what he does out of ignorance and he doesn't like truth. An oppressor does what he does because he can harm people and he gets a rise out of that. He gets energized by harming other people. That's why in modern day psychology, he's called a white collar psychopath. Okay, the fool has said in his heart, there is no God. That is the same category, and we looked at that also before. So on a scale of 1 to 10, minus 1 to 10, you can see where the fool is and go straight up, and you'll see how God feels about that individual. So we've taken care of the pigs and dogs in our life. I'm assuming so. We have our boundaries as they need to be. We're walking on the straight and narrow. We're walking on the path of life. We are fulfilling Proverbs chapter 3, verses 5 and 6. Trust and learn with all our heart. Don't lean on our own understanding. In all our ways, we acknowledge him, and he's directing our path. We are acting within Psalm 91:1. We've talked about this also before. He who remains under the shadow of the Almighty remains stable and fixed. So the three key verses to remaining on the path, by the way, the first is the last two verses of Psalm 139. Search me, O God, and know my heart. Show me my anxious thoughts and my hurtful ways, and lead me in the way or the path. Lead me in the way everlasting. So the two things that'll pull us off the path are anxiety and fear. We've looked at that extensively. So once we're operating out of faith and we're trusting, Psalm 91:1, he who remains under the shadow of the Almighty, God's shadow, as it were, superintends our way if we stay on the path. And then on that path, we will hit forks in the road. decision-making time, as well as, and the most difficult time, temptation and when pressure mounts and when oppression hits. Then the question is, what are we going to do? And if we can maintain Proverbs chapter 3, verses 5 and 6, trust in the Lord with all our heart, don't lean on our own understanding, in all our ways acknowledge him, and he'll direct our path, then we are walking in faith. Then we are acting in faith. And again, we're not dealing with the pigs and dogs by that time, right? The pigs and the dogs are where? They are down at the bottom, right? But we're going to show you where the pigs and dogs are again, and we shouldn't be in the negative. We need to be in the blue. So if I'm walking on the path, I'm going to be in the blue. Go back and look at some of the past broadcasts that we've done. We've talked about this chart, but the pigs and the dogs are in the mocker category. They're kind of under the woodshed discipline, or probably his rebuke and his anger. So they're right in the middle, but they're slowly morphing because nobody ever stays the same. We're either getting better or worse, better or bitter. Selfishness grows. So we're going to assume now that we are on the blue in our chart here, right? We're on the path of life. So we aren't bringing pain upon ourselves. We then are going to encounter two groups of people. We're going to encounter people that hate truth. And that again is who Jesus was talking to as far as, sorry, let me try again, right? The two groups of people that are going to encounter people that hate truth are the oppressed. So a persecutor or an oppressor will bear down on someone they can take advantage of, someone that can't defend themselves. Those are the oppressed. Then God wants us to do what? Those that are not being oppressed, he wants us to be protective. It is to those two groups of category that Jesus speaks, and that God has given his greatest gift of stability, and that is himself. He promises to be with us. And the thing that he has given to us is his word. He's promised it, right? If we make a promise, we say, I give you my word. So it's interesting when God talks about his word. God is a promise-keeping God. And the one thing he has given in order to help us maintain stability is the promise that he will not only not leave us or forsake us, but that he will, actually, he's made a number of promises, but there's a primary one. So he'll be with us. He'll never leave us or forsake us. He will guide us. He'll open doors. He'll be with us when we go through very difficult things, through the valley of the shadow of death. That's not just physical death, but also when we go through very difficult things, because life has a way. As Jesus said, in this life you will have difficulties. In Psalm 107, it summarizes, so I recommend you read Psalm 107 because it summarizes the three categories of troubles, or that bring troubles into our life. It says through oppression, troubles, and sorrows. Sorrows have to do with living in this fallen world, right? It's only a matter of time till we lose somebody we care about through death. That is sorrow, right? We sorrow, we grieve, but not as those that have no hope. So the first category that God wants to help us with is our sorrows, our losses with other people. Then you add people to that, and now we got trouble. Okay. There's a musical spells out trouble, I think. Okay. But right, if you add people to that, now we're going to have challenges, including ourselves, quite frankly, because sometimes we can be our own worst enemy. But people will cause challenges, but we're talking about medium to lower levels. Remember on that chart, a scale of 1 to 10, as far as the degree to which somebody can be impacted. So we're going to look at that chart again, and you see scale of 1 to 10 right there in the middle. Trouble tends to have to do with kind of middle to lower numbers, though it also can mean, certainly, what about negligence? Right? Negligence can result in death. So I'm not minimizing the pain, but in terms of also intentionality. Right? So trouble has to do with uh, intentionality, either best of intentions but still allowed or brought pain in, so negligence, and or selfishness. As a matter of fact, our chart right here, let me bring that chart up again. You notice I've in right across the bottom of that tornado, it says personal injury. Then go straight up where we've seen that bottle again. That's where God collects our pain, our tears in a bottle. You see the word negligence. So a lot of things can bring personal injury. One is negligence. God cares very much. The Jews were going to have to make somebody whole if there was negligence, plus they would add 20% on top of it for pain and suffering. But think about the far right end of that chart. Now we're talking personal injury because of injustice. That's when God's intense protectiveness towards us steps in. And that is the category of oppression. And that is the result of people that do not care. And as a matter of fact, they not only do not care, but what? They actually are targeting you. They're targeting me. So for oppression to take place, it presupposes that you are not bringing it upon yourself. You're minding your own business. You're doing what is right. And somebody is coming in to target you because you either cannot defend yourself or you are defending those, you're helping those that have been targeted. So when that happens, the enemy, who is an oppressor, will double down. We've talked in terms of what's the difference between a narcissist, sociopath, and psychopath. Let me bring up that category again. The psychopath will do something very unique. You see on the bottom right. The sociopath operates on a cost benefit analysis. When the cost outweighs the benefit, he will stop. He or she will stop. But the psychopath will go to war once the injured party, the person that's being negatively impacted, once they set boundaries up. A sociopath will not go to war. They will move on. A psychopath, right, a fool, a reprobate, those older terms, they will punish someone for setting boundaries. That's the distinguishing characteristic that separates the narcissists and the sociopaths from the psychopaths. But to be a psychopath presupposes you believe you have the right, you're the center of the universe. You have the right to somebody else's boundaries. So you are a narcissist first, and then you become a salesperson. You're working people, you're manipulating them. Therefore, you're a sociopath, and eventually you become that snowball continues to grow, and you become that psychopath. So when you are on the receiving end of a profoundly selfish and targeting individual, when you're on the receiving end of an oppressor, what do you do? Will an oppressor ever apologize? The answer is, of course not. Right? The fact that they are an oppressor means they have gone beyond the category of the fool. Let me bring that up again. And I recommend you read Proverbs chapter 1, also Proverbs chapter 6. But there is a line beyond which, if you cross it, you're never coming back. Now, that makes people nervous, especially those that have a church-related background, because it's like, what, God can't save anybody? That's not the of course, he can save anybody, but the question is, how does God deal with us? And what he says is there's a point beyond which he will turn somebody over. Romans chapter 1, he will give them over. But as they're being given over, so he's really letting them go. As they go their own way, changes happen, and they ultimately believe that they are God in their own lives. Now, they may not say that, but the first thing they get to is that because it says the fool has said in his heart, what? There is no God. What are you like if you say in your heart of hearts, and really what they're saying is this, they'll never be held accountable. That's a scary person. So if you reach a point where you really believe in your heart of hearts, you don't have anything to worry about. How did you get to that point? You didn't get there overnight. You got there by repeatedly overriding, crossing somebody's boundaries, meaning violating their rights. And that certainly starts on the inside with attitudes, demeaning. That you look at Matthew 5, and Jesus goes to the heart of the matter, right? The scribes and Pharisees were staying on the superficial stuff, but meanwhile, their hearts, They were disrespectful. They devalued people. They depreciated people. And Jesus went to the heart of the matter at that level. If you continue to devalue and disrespect somebody, disregard somebody, then your behavior will eventually follow. And you will get to a point where it's no big deal. So you're morphing from a mocker into the realm of being a fool. Once you are there, you're never coming back. I hate to tell you. So that should be the fear of the Lord. How do you know if somebody has entered the realm of the fool? They think this topic is stupid or boring because they don't believe it to be true. And therefore, are they ever going to take this seriously? And therefore, are they ever going to be driven to make amends? Are they ever going to experience step 4 of the 12 steps? They did a searching and fearless moral inventory, and the rest of the steps have to do with going and making amends. That's Matthew chapter 5. If you're at the altar presenting your gift and you suddenly remember that you were a jerk, okay, that's sort of Greek, right? What are you going to do? Right? And he's really talking to somebody in that middle category because the person over on the right isn't going to have that thought. Well, if you suddenly remember you were hurtful, they don't suddenly remember anymore. Why? Because they put it out of their mind. Why? Because they don't want it in their mind anymore. So they lose the desire to be any other way than what they are, and they double down on it. And therefore, they lose remorse, they lose empathy, and they lose their conscience. Those are the 3 working definitions of primary characteristics of a white-collar psychopath, of a psychopath. So when it comes to people that are in the category of the fool or category of that are a psychopath, okay, white collar psychopath or a reprobate, they will target people and target them in life changing ways to punish and to prove a point. So they're already taking advantage because they are already sociopaths, but you set boundaries up and now they're going to go after that person. And the question is, what do you do when somebody is targeting you for worse, for ill? They're out to change the course of your life. And you can do that a number of different ways. We've looked at that. Slander is soul murder. What do you do? Because they usually will have their way for a while, meaning they're harming you. And what do you do? Well, you either just sit there and grin and take it, you either just suck it up, you either play mind games with yourself, or you become in touch with what's going on. And then if the flip side of hurt is anger, meaning if you're being hurt, they're hurting you, you're experiencing anger, that's righteous indignation. What are you to do with that? Well, most people don't even allow themselves to experience anger, so it stays under the surface. The body keeps the score. The body's pumping in adrenaline. Adrenaline then, within clinical circles, what do we call that? We call that anxiety. And then you push anger down long enough, you become depressed. So the 2 major categories of all mental health issues have to do with suppressed anger. And where does that anger come from? We're going to assume it's not the anger of an adult 2-year-old. That would be crossing boundaries and putting knapsacks in someone else. We're talking about people that wouldn't want to violate somebody's rights. So now we're talking about the people that have knapsacks put on them. When you go to give those knapsacks back, and now a person targets you, or they target you because you were easily targeted, that's oppression. And what are you to do? Well, if you understand God's heart, you are going to be able to find stability and peace and rest and strength in that. Why? Because God's heart is for what? God's heart is for the oppressed. And he said through Moses to the children of Israel that if anybody harms them, what would he do? If you've been with us, this at the end of the Deuteronomy chapter 32, what does he say? That he will take up their cause. He will vindicate. He is the avenger of blood. And we can be bleeding to death emotionally. And there are a number of Psalms where God equates that. So as a matter of fact, think about fruits of our labor, blood, sweat, and tears. So there's a lot of things that are symbolic also of our effort. So I can shed blood right out in the open, or I can cause someone to bleed emotionally through slander, through doing things, through breaking promises. How about the spouse that walks out? How about the guy that walks out on his spouse? Okay, he breaks her heart. That's why God told the Israelites that the death penalty for adultery. Why? Because it was that life changing. God's very serious, and his heart is for the oppressed. So he's made promises to avenge, to be the source of their strength, and to take matters into their own hands. So, what is an imprecatory prayer? It is simply a prayer that takes God at his word, that he knows and he sees and he cares and he's intensely interested. And it is asking God to do what God promised to do. It is really the ultimate prayer of faith. It makes some people nervous, this concept, and we talked about now why. Why would this greatest source of stability, the repeating, either within my heart of hearts as I read the book of Psalms, half the book of Psalms, 46% of it are imprecatory prayers, and throughout Scripture, quite frankly, but especially condensed in the book of Psalms, meaning there's such a condensing of these prayers. If it makes someone nervous, there's probably some reasons why. But why would this aspect of God's heart, his protective nature, his rescuing nature, why would that cause people to be nervous or to be uneasy? And we looked at a couple of reasons. We will look at additional reasons after the break. But the primary reasons I'm convinced of is this, that people are uneasy with this because they have not taken the requirements to treat people properly the way that God would want us to treat them. They haven't taken that seriously, and therefore they're cutting themselves slack in being selfish. Right? And so that's why imprecatory prayers are first and foremost very self-purifying. This is looking at the log in our own eyes. Because just as Matthew 5 says, that if I'm at the altar presenting my gift and suddenly I remember, like my conscience hasn't been bothering me up to this point, that's pretty scary. Of course it has. I've been ignoring it. And so we looked at in the past, this will require me to do self-examination first. But once I have taken care of business, and once I'm now walking in the light and I'm treating people properly, then this is wonderful news. So if someone doesn't like the idea that God still is a God of judgment, meaning he will act on behalf of those who are harming other people. That's really what this is about. An imprecatory prayer is God's gift to those that are being harmed by oppressors. So oppressors should be nervous. So you can be an oppressor, but look really spiritual. So God's message to an oppressor is, you better watch out. I mean, God's coming for you. You either stop or God will make you stop. Another reason why somebody would be uncomfortable with this is if they've been facilitating or enabling an oppressor. We looked at that previously as well, that God condemns those that are going to enable evil and wickedness and oppression. So if you side with a selfish person and tell the injured party or the person that's being negatively impacted, you know what, basically just don't make a big deal of it, then you're enabling evil and wickedness. You're enabling a selfish person, and therefore you're under judgment. If you're going to side with somebody, who should you be siding with? Not the selfish person, but if you're that person, if you enable or rescue somebody at the expense of somebody else, then the question is why? And you may have made an idol of domestic tranquility, which there's no domestic tranquility because somebody's dying on the receiving end of oppression. And why doesn't that move you? And it also may be that people don't want their lives disrupted. So you've got an oppressor taking it out on somebody who's innocent, and I don't want to get involved. Why? Because then I have to get involved. And then the person may target me, or my life won't be the same. Correct. But the Lord says what? That we need to pick up our cross and follow him. We are not to allow evil to go unchecked. Those that are being oppressed need us to step in. Isaiah 59, Isaiah 63 says that God was appalled, he was disgusted, that there was no one to help the oppressed. We need to be that person. And we will look at, again, the power of imprecatory prayers and what are those. And have we got a sample for you? Have we got an example for you of what an imprecatory prayer is like, so that you can take heart that God knows and he cares and he will be your strong fortress and your ally when the enemy comes in like a flood. And we will look at that on the other side of the break.
Are you or someone you know a survivor of abuse and wondering where to turn for trustworthy help and insights into the effects of such abuse? Ever wish you had access to a resource that could help you continue your progress in your healing? SurvivorSupport.net is that resource. It is a one-of-a-kind resource developed by Jon Uhler, a seasoned therapist with over 3 decades of experience working with sexual abuse survivors, to help survivors with the process of healing. It can also help you understand the nature of those who harmed you so you can gain clarity and continue healing. If you are interested in speaking with Jon Uhler about your situation or having Jon conduct a consultation or a training for your church or organization, SurvivorSupport.net serves as a convenient method of contacting him. Our weekly program, Journey to Healing, is made possible through the generous donations of viewers like you. There are many opportunities and needs that Survivor Support is attempting to meet, so your monthly support or a one-time gift would be extremely helpful as we seek to meet those needs and opportunities. Simply visit SurvivorSupport.net and you will see the link to donate on the homepage. We thank you.
Thank you. My ever trusty engineer told me that I was just waxing eloquently. So sorry about that, meaning I didn't have my microphone on. So let me start again. Welcome back. I'm Jon Uhler. This is Journey to Healing. We're here every Friday night, 8 to 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on TECN.TV, the leader in Internet TV. I recommend you go to SurvivorSupport.net under the podcast tab, and you'll see the repository of the programs we're doing, especially on this series of forgiveness, what it is and what it is not. We're picking up where we left off before the break, looking at the topic of imprecatory prayers. And it is my contention that imprecatory prayers are the second greatest gift that God has given to us. The first is the gift of salvation. The second is the gift of his presence, his promise to be with us. I mentioned this last time. I'm going to read this again because this is key. What is an imprecatory prayer? It's the greatest source of stability when under pressure, when under fire, when all hell breaks loose around you, when the enemy is closing in like a flood, is the knowledge that the Lord made a promise never to leave us or forsake us. That he promised to be with us through the fire and through the flood. And he will be with us as we go through the valley of the shadow of death, through the deepest and darkest of times, through the dark night of the soul, and that he knows and he sees and he cares and he feels what we're going through and is intensely interested. He's concerned and he's focused on seeing us through to the other side of the test and the trial and the oppression, to rescue us from the oppression, to help us on to our journey to healing. The source of our strength is God's promise. And God has made promises, but the most important promise. So whenever you see David reference promise singular, it is my contention that David is hearkening back to the last words of God through Moses. Deuteronomy chapter 32. God told the Israelites that he would avenge their pain if anybody dared oppress them. So that was the promise. There's a number of ways that God has given to us to help us be stable and fixed. And I'm going to, I want to read a couple of these to you. There are so many we could choose from. Let me read Psalm 110, verse 5. It says, "The Lord stands at your right hand to protect you. He will strike down many kings when his anger erupts." So God promises when the enemy is coming at you like a flood, when the oppressors are coming at you, he will promise to be with you. What else has he promised? In Psalm 112, starting in verse 4, says this: "The light arises in the darkness for the upright. For the upright, gracious, compassionate." Oh, I'm sorry. And this is the amplified version, so it really brings out some of the feel of this. So let me start again. "Light arises in the darkness for the upright, the gracious and compassionate and the just, those who are in right standing with God." By the way, in the Beatitudes, that is, the pure in heart. Verse 5, "It is well with the man who deals generously and lends, who conducts his affairs with justice." There's the key. Now, by the way, we are not to deal generously and lend to pigs, so there's a difference, right? Verse 6, "He will not be moved forever," meaning something's bearing down on him, but he's not going to be moved forever. "The uncompromisingly righteous," or the pure in heart, "the upright in right standing with God, shall be in everlasting remembrance." Of who? Of God. "He shall not be afraid of evil tidings. His heart is firmly fixed, trusting or leaning on and being confident in the Lord." Meaning this is all under pressure. His heart is, verse 8, "His heart is established and steady. He will not be afraid while he waits to see," here it is, "his desire established upon his adversaries." Let me ask you, what desire is going to be established upon his adversaries? What do you think that's talking about? The enemy, the adversary, is coming down on him, is harming him, and his desire is what? And as he breathes forth prayers, and as he's actually praying, and his sighs and his cries, what is his heart's desire? Verse 8 again, "His heart is established and steady, and he will not be afraid while he waits to see his desire established upon his adversary." He's calling out to the Lord, in other words. Verse 9, "He is distributed freely," meaning he's still so stable that he's able to think of other people. So he is distributed freely. He is given to the poor and the needy. That's right out of the Beatitudes in Matthew 5. So the protected person is giving to the needy. His righteousness, meaning the pure in heart, the upright, right standing with God, endures forever. His horn, that means his strength, shall be exalted in honor. Here it is. "The wicked man will see it and be grieved and angered." And who? The wicked man will gnash his teeth and disappear in despair, and the desire of the wicked shall perish and come to nothing. So we have a contrast of desires. So David in that psalm is talking about the person who can rely upon and trust God's promise will be able to derive stability while he is trusting that God will move on his behalf. Psalm 116. I want to read this. "I love the Lord because he has heard and now hears my voice and my supplication," which is an intensity, by the way. "Because he has inclined his ear to me, therefore I'll call upon him as long as I live." Notice in verse 2, "because he has inclined his ear to me." That's someone that's confident that when he prays, somebody up in heaven is listening. "The cords and sorrows of death were around me." And by the way, this is not just death from old age. Okay. "And the terrors of Sheol, or the place of the dead, had laid hold of me. I suffer anguish and grief, trouble and sorrow. Then I called upon the name of the Lord. I beseech you, save my life and deliver me." And here's the result of an imprecatory prayer. "Glorious is the Lord and rigidly righteous. Yes, our God is merciful." Wouldn't talk about rigidly righteous if this was just he was suffering physically, and God cares about when we do suffer physically. Verse 6, "The Lord preserves the simple. I was brought low, and he helped and saved me." Verse 7, "Return to your rest, O my soul." That's the gift that God has. That's the benefit of an imprecatory prayer. I'm pouring out my heart to God when I am being oppressed. For the Lord has dealt bountifully with you, so return my soul to rest. Okay, verse 8. For you have delivered my life from death, my eyes from tears, and my feet from stumbling and falling. I will walk before the Lord in the land of the living. Verse 10. I believed, trusted, relied upon, and clung to my God, and therefore I have spoken, even when I said, I'm greatly afflicted. And I said in my haste, what? I said in my haste, all men are deceivers and liars. Now, you can tell right there, he's not talking about natural death, right? What is he talking about? That people are causing him pain, especially ones that have an advantage. And so they're lying, they're deceiving. He continues in the same Psalm 116. What shall I render the Lord? Now, the Lord has come in, has swooped in, and has rescued him, meaning taken the oppressors to task. So David says this, what shall I render to the Lord for all of his benefits to me? How can I repay him for all the bountiful dealings? 13. I will lift up the cup of salvation and deliverance and call on the name of the Lord. What is the cup of salvation? That was during the Passover Seder dinner. There's a cup of salvation, right? How did God save the Jews? Parting the Red Sea, but then killing the enemy. So it is salvation by seeing the enemy destroyed. 14, I'll pay my vows to the Lord. Yes, in the presence of all his people. That's not begrudgingly, because it's out of a heart of thankfulness. Precious and important and no light matter is the sight of the Lord is the death of his saints. So when somebody dies, and we may not understand why, God cares. Oh Lord, truly I'm your servant. I am your servant, the son of your handmaid. You have loosed my bonds, and I will offer to you the sacrifice of thanksgiving and call on the name of the Lord. There is a degree of thanks and stability. Why? Because when I know that God has made promises to step in and to rescue, I then can pour out my heart when oppressors are coming down on me. Jeremiah, the weeping prophet, if anybody had a heart for those that were off the path and doing the wrong thing, it was Jeremiah, so much so that God had to tell him to stop trying to intercede and intervene on behalf of those that were oppressors. Remember, a number of times, 5 times, God had to tell Jeremiah, stop praying for them. So when Jeremiah was on the receiving end of oppression, what was he able to say in chapter 12? Lord, you always give me justice when I bring my case before you. So let me bring this complaint. So if someone says, no, you shouldn't complain, it depends upon what we mean by complaint. So let me bring this complaint. Why are the wicked so prosperous? Why are evil people so happy? He's referencing oppressors. You planted them and they've taken root and they prospered. Your name is on their lips, but you are far from their hearts. But as for me, Lord, you know my heart. You see me and test my thoughts. Drag these people away like sheep to be butchered. That's where, verse 2, that's where you know that it's not just the average person. These are oppressors. So what is a godly prayer? The the end of verse 3, drag these people away like sheep to be butchered and set them aside to be what? That's right, to be slaughtered. Why? Because they are harming. And God in his mercy, God in his care and compassion, has given us promises. And the reason why most people don't take it to the Lord in prayer is they've been told that God doesn't care. And if we're on the path, if we're doing what he wants us to do, and we now encounter oppressors, that's the worst kind of pain. In Psalm 107, the worst category is oppression. God wants us to take it to him. Take what to him? The fact that it's happening, he already knows. But I want to show you, and if any of us can finally grab hold of this, the book of Psalms and Proverbs, quite frankly, but the book of Psalms will become our greatest source of encouragement. And we will go to that rather than pick up the phone and talk to somebody if somebody is oppressing us. The reason we don't go to God first is ultimately because we don't believe he's there. We don't believe he's listening. Why? Probably because We've been told that our pain doesn't matter, but it does if we're on the path, if we're doing the right thing. That's why in the preamble, in the Sermon on the Mount, he was talking to two categories of people that he wanted to give encouragement to let them know God still sees and he knows. He hasn't forgotten. He's still the avenging God. He will avenge oppression. And if I believe that, that will radically alter my prayer life, because now it's not perfunctory. Now I'm taking my pain to God, the pain from doing the right thing, like David. That's why David wrote those psalms, those poems, and why God worked so hard to preserve them for us. Half the book of Psalms. So what is an imprecatory prayer like? An imprecatory prayer is direct communication between me and the Avenger of Blood, the Lord of Heaven's armies, the commanding officer, that I trust that God will take not just into account, but he will take action, and he will do so in his timing, but in a direct way. And there is a movie that captures, I believe, what this is all about. And it is called Tears of the Sun. And I'm going to play the trailer to bring you up to speed, to really get you set up for what an imprecatory prayer is like. So this will show you when oppression is active. What does God do?
Activity is high as foreign nationals continue to be evacuated from all over Nigeria.
Gentlemen, we're gonna have to put you back in. Your prime objective is to extract Dr. Lena Kendricks. Our presence underground will be considered hostile.
My name is Lieutenant Waters. I'm with the U.S. Navy. I'm here to get you and your people out.
It was a routine rescue operation.
Get your people together. This jungle is filling up with rebel troops. When they get to this mission, they will kill everything they see.
But in a country at war with itself,
The entire presidential family has been assassinated.
everything can change. In a moment.
Birds are taking heavy fire and we're no longer entering Nigerian airspace. Right now, you are on your own.
Now, behind enemy lines,
Send all our men to Kashanga.
we got trouble.
Intel estimates 5,000 rebels converging on your area.
Everybody down!
To complete his mission,
That's us.
Let's go now.
he would have to make the ultimate choice.
What about my people?
I'm not here for them.
It's been strongly suggested that we can abandon these refugees out here. I'll tell you right now, I'm not gonna do that. Can't do that.
I strongly advise you complete the evacuation as planned.
You know as well as I do what's gonna happen to him if I leave him out here.
That is not your mission. Your unit is not equipped to handle the additional threat.
My team will complete this mission.
Get these people ready to go now.
Wait for my go.
Get touched. God is a rescuing God. And so what does he do when we are under fire? What does he do when the enemy comes in like a flood with us? When we cannot defend ourselves, or when we are rescuing those who are under enemy fire, so to speak. When somebody is being oppressed, when somebody is being targeted, we are called to do what? We're called to be his hands and his feet. And when we are doing his will, like David said, he trusted that when he called out to God, God would send his forces and his reinforcements. And when God takes off, when God is moved, we can trust that we will see him if we remain faithful. And we are going to see a very good example of what God does with the enemy on our behalf.
do you read me? Eagle 1, this is Star 1. Come in.
Go now! Run! Run straight for that gate! Dangerous! We have to go! Hang on, we're here! We're here! We're at the border! The gate's right over there! Listen, let us through! Please, let us through! Please! Open the gate! Let us through! Open the gates! Please open the gates! Please! Coming in! Fuck! Doc, check him out! How's he doing? Got a low pulse!
Eagle 1, this is Star 1. Eagle 1.
This is Star 1. Do you read?
Star 1, this is Eagle 1. Go!
What do you got down there, LT?
I got buku bad guys between the tree line and my smoke. Doc, pop smoke now. Where's Silk and Red?
Silk's dead. I don't think Red made it. You stay with me, Z. Z, you stay with me. Stay with me.
I got white smoke, LT.
Let her rip, Dad. Danger close.
Roger that. Coming in hot.
Come on, Red! Come on! Move on! Come on! Come on! Red, come on! Get down! Get your head down! Cover!
Those are like imprecatory prayers. God cares intensely. He is involved. And if we are on the path, if we are doing what he wants us to do, that means we are about the business of what is closest to his heart. Then we can trust. If the enemy is closing in like a flood, if those that are out to harm us will not stop, we can radio to our commanding officer, and he will bring in the support in a very dramatic way if we wait and trust and wait actively. We will continue looking at what are imprecatory prayers next time on Journey to Healing.
You've been listening to Journey to Healing, sponsored by SurvivorSupport.net. We trust you've been helped by the information our host, Jon Uhler, has shared. To donate to this ministry, to schedule a personal consultation with Jon, or to arrange a professional training for your church or organization with Jon, simply visit our website. On behalf of Survivor Support, we look forward to hearing from you and to have you join us next time on Journey to Healing.